he's an engineer by training, and he spent decades of his life working with one of the big oil companies, global oil companies in the world. And he started writing in the 80s. I have his book here, Ofia Became Home, and we're going to talk a little about what is written here regarding the Nigeria-Biafran civil war. And he's going to tell us his thoughts. It's a very, personalized account because he speaks of it. He stars in the book. He's a character in the book, so to speak. And he has written it up to 373 pages of solid content. And we're going to ask him about this book today. Please, I'm going to ask him a little question to start with about the book. So what drove your interest in writing?
Well, war itself sparked my interest in writing the book, Ofia Became Home. I was an ordinary child victim of the Nigeria-Biafra war. I was one of the thousands of Igbere people who ended up in the forest for 9 months. So it was my experience in the Nigeria-Biafra war that sparked my interest in writing about war from the perspective of ordinary people. Although long ago, I came to the realization that many published stories, wars, rarely do justice to the heroism displayed by ordinary people well behind the front lines. They rarely do justice to the misery unleashed on ordinary people. Today, if we turn on our televisions, we see the horror of Ukrainians hunkering down in their subways or rushing to trains that are already full of people. We shudder at that, but all we see is a mere scratch on the surface of the misery unfolding for those people. So we never really know anything of significance about the suffering of people in all these wars. What Ofia Became Home tries to do is to delve into the behind-the-scenes details of what ordinary people have to contend with when all these wars are visited on them. Usually we focus on the politics of war. Usually we focus on the machineries of war. We focus on the heroes of war. We touch very lightly on the suffering of ordinary people. The 5-minute TV segments don't come close to showing us what people truly go through. So Ofia Became Home is an attempt to balance the picture a little bit and shine some light on how people suffer, mostly outside of the view of the cameras. Okay?
Yes. Thank you so much for that. And that is very sobering, especially in the face of the current events that the world has become involved in, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And our hearts go out to those who are affected. And like you said, we can argue about it, politicize it and all that, but people are affected. Real people are affected. Please, can you tell us a little bit about specifically the Igbere people? What was Igbere like before the war, during the war? I mean, what was the what made Igbere special in their experience with this war? I hope you heard that.
Anyway, as I was saying, Igbere was a very compact rural community before the war. A very traditional Igbo community, a high-density place because for some reason our ancestors chose to live together. We lived together in traditional compounds that were highly packed, comprising of concentric rows of houses. Our farms were very far away from where we lived, but we were highly organized. Igbere has continued to be a very organized, a very orderly place. That has allowed us to develop the community to the extent that, as I said before, people insist that it is no longer a village. We are a people that work together on common issues. We are an enterprising people that love our community. People pride the homes they build in Igbere higher than they do the ones they build outside.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to turn over to Ndukwe, and I'm asking the question, how are we relating with each other today? How has the war impacted Igbos, Hausas, Yorubas, and all the other tribes? How does conflict generally impact the relationship of the people who have to live together after the conflict? And what do you think is the impact today in the Nigerian society? Ndukwe, please.
I got most of that. I would say that the war impacted relationships very poorly. The antagonisms with other Nigerian tribes which existed before the war and which partly led to the war were very loudly amplified by the war. Having your properties seized and declared abandoned, having your bank savings reduced to £20 regardless of how much you left in the account for 3 years, missing out on the windfall of a hasty indigenization decree that transferred foreign-owned companies to Nigerians so soon after the war. None of that laid the foundations for positive outcome, for positive post-war relationships in Nigeria. Yet the Igbos bounced back remarkably quickly in education, in commerce, in sports, and in entertainment. We even became the technocrats of choice once again for Nigeria. Successive governments, both civilian and military, turned to Igbo technocrats at critical junctures. About Dr. Kalika Kalo, Dr. Chu Okongu, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Mr. Ernest Ndukwe, and Professor Charles Soludo. We even again became the faces of international glory in sports for Nigeria. Remember Nwankwo Kanu, J.J. Okocha, Christian Chukwu, and even Chioma Ajunwa. But such post-war successes seemed to have fueled resentment instead of helping acceptance. So much so that some people today feel uncomfortable about the very thought of an Igbo person accessing the highest job in the land, even though there is no historical justification for that kind of concern, given that the Igbos have helped develop Nigeria for all Nigerians more than other parts of Nigeria. Even though the Igbos have helped develop other parts of Nigeria more than they have done for Nigeria itself. So the war definitely made what was already bad worse in terms of relationships amongst the people of Nigeria, and especially between the people of Nigeria and the Igbos, who are still doing all they can to integrate themselves into the Nigerian society, finding obstacles at every turn in that good faith
I would like
effort.
you to speak a little to the agitations that we have today. What are your thoughts on federalism? What are your thoughts on secession? How can we create a society in Nigeria where everyone is free to make their own contribution and benefit from those contributions, and have other people in this construct we have found ourselves also benefiting in a peaceful manner and in a manner that allows them to maximize.
Both secession and proper federalism could be solutions to the Nigerian question. There were 165 sovereign nations in the 60s when I was going through primary school. There are 210 sovereign nations today. That's a 27% increase. And that came about through, in some cases, secessions, and in some cases, negotiated independence. We remember Yugoslavia, we remember Czechoslovakia, we remember Sudan. Eritrea was once part of Ethiopia, and Scotland is still trying to see it. Having been together this long, I think Nigerians are better off in a proper federation in which major components have reasonable political and economic autonomy. Some strong have developed over the years. We are heavily invested in each other. All of that has to mean something. All of that can benefit all Nigerians if we protect the gains for all Nigerians. But if we cannot achieve a fair and stable federation, we would be better off amicably splitting up the entity into smaller, more stable sovereign nations. But if we really want to achieve a stable, more peaceful, more fair federation, there is, in my opinion, no alternative to sitting down and negotiating in good faith. No part will get everything that it wants out of that kind of negotiation. But sitting down to do that is, in my opinion, the only way. In fact, even if our preference is to split the place up peacefully, then we still have to sit down and negotiate. Where we sit, how we sit is less important. Some insist on what they call the Sovereign National Conference. Those in power today and those that will be in power tomorrow and those that were in power yesterday do not want that. We have a National Assembly. I believe we can use it to begin to make incremental progress if we can't deal with everything in one fell swoop. The all or nothing tendency actually leads to paralysis. We've been talking about this so-called restructuring now for decades, and we haven't moved the needle 1 inch. It's better for us, if we can, to use the constructs we already have in the National Assembly to begin to chip away at those things we actually want restructuring to achieve. Fundamentally, what we want is for every part of Nigeria to feel that it belongs in a fair federation, to be able, if necessary, to develop at its own pace while still being a respected and an accepted part of the Nigerian Federation. That shouldn't be too difficult if people come to a negotiation table in good faith, willing to understand what is concerning the other side and willing to make the necessary compromises. If we continue to insist on the way things are, or if we continue to come to discussions with clenched fists instead of open hands, then we will remain in the lose-lose situation that we are in right now. And so for me, it is negotiation, negotiation, negotiation. You can negotiate a proper federalism, or you can negotiate peaceful separation so that the components of Nigeria that result from separation can continue to live peacefully side by side and can continue to do business with each other.
Has Nigeria been open to the Igbos from your perspective?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that Igbos are able to go to every part of Nigeria and put down roots and contribute to every corner of Nigeria. Yes, in the sense that Nigeria does turn to Igbos to help out, as I mentioned before. Yes, in the sense that Igbos are able to play in the Nigerian private space where they do very, very well. But no, in terms of the fact that when it comes to some sensitive jobs or roles in Nigeria, all kinds of obstacles tend to be thrown up. No, in terms of the fact that there are certain ongoing subtle discriminations against the Igbos for being Igbos. So the credit for much of what the Igbos have contributed and are contributing are actually due more to the Igbos than to the openness of Nigeria to the Igbos. We are knocking on the doors, and sometimes we find them open and we push through and go in and help out. So yes, Nigeria is open to us, but Nigeria also closes certain rooms against us.
I'd like to turn over to Ndukwe and ask you to share your final thoughts, as well as what you think anybody who's going to read this book will take away from it. So.
If I may, on the question of where we go from here.
Great.
If I may comment on what I think I heard you ask about where we go from here in terms of relationships amongst the various peoples of Africa. Was that the question?
Yes, please. That's great. That's it. Where we go
then
from
the
here?
First thing I would say is that as bad as things are, some progress has been made, even in Nigeria. I would say that as bad as things look, let's look at the likes of Rwanda and what they've done, the post-war success they have achieved in terms of managing their internal differences. It is doable if we start by acknowledging that there are differences and that some of those differences are understandable. It is doable when we begin to see tribes not necessarily as pockets of enemies. There could even be pockets of competitors. If we acknowledge that every tribe may come to an entity with different needs, different expectations, different views of how the country should be run, and we will be predisposed to engaging each other respectfully. We would be in a position to listen to what everybody brings to a table, if we ever set up the table, as they did in Rwanda, as they did in South Africa when apartheid was abolished. What will bog us down, or shall I say continue to bog us down, is coming to discussions with fixed views and refusing to be moved even an inch. It is approaching discussions as fight you must win at the expense of the other. It is the zero-sum approach to discussing issues that could stop us from making more progress. Most of our problems are discussable, they are solvable, but they will all involve some degree of compromise. In Nigeria, it's about time we took real steps towards addressing the imbalance in our political structure. And we do not need to look to the West or the East for examples. We can look to some success stories on the African continent. Even though some of those countries are smaller, far less complex than Nigeria is. As an Igbo man, I look at my Yoruba brother as a brother who may have different expectations of how Nigeria should be run. I look at my Northern brother as a brother who may have different expectations from the Nigerian Federation. If they would do the same, then when we come together to discuss the way forward, we will be coming together to discuss our common future. Whether we stay together or stay apart, we will still have common future. As long as you share a boundary with somebody, it doesn't matter what flag you fly, you will have a common future. You will have to do business with each other. So we should approach the future with that kind of mindset. There is enough in every African country and on the continent itself for all its people. Why don't we approach things in such a way that we can not just share, but build together? Why don't we approach things in such a way that the plenty that God has blessed Africa with is fairly available to all of us? It is a tendency to think that if I win something, you lose. It's not necessarily the case. It's a tendency to want to have 100% of nothing instead of 10% of a bigger pie. So if we can switch our mindset from that of scrambling for something that is there to building together, building a bigger pie, if you like, before we start sharing, I think we can make much better progress. If we start showing more tolerance for differences, and that should start with the younger people among us, I think we can make progress. But if we continue to approach issues only from the point of view of what is good for me and not what is good for us, then all these negotiations we are talking about, all these conferences we are talking about, will simply become one more playground where we disagree and paralyze each other. So let's open up our minds if we want to change anything. Let's acknowledge where we are and acknowledge that we are different people with common interest. And then we may be able to make progress together. First, I'll give you my summary of the book, since I haven't had the opportunity so far to speak to you about it. When the Nigeria-Biafra Civil War arrived at my Igbere clan on March 30, 1969, the war had already been raging for 2 years and had already consumed most of Biafra. Our Igbere people, my family among them, had already been pushed back to our village of Igbere. There were thousands and thousands of us in the village in March of 1969 when the war arrived at our doorsteps, unannounced, with ferocious bombing, ferocious shelling, not unlike what you are seeing today happening in Ukraine. There weren't many options of free destinations to run to. We therefore ran into our remote forests and farmlands, not sure they would provide refuge. But holding together, we made those remote farms and forests not only our refuge, but our new home for 9 months. That's what this book is about. Those 9 difficult months that the Igbere people had to fend for themselves without help from the outside world. But it is more about Igbere people as tenacious survivors than as helpless victims. The book shows that we tried to recreate the life we left behind, but for the most part, we were forced to live and die the animals that were our new neighbors. We scavenged, we hunted, we farmed, and we tried to experiment with anything the land and waters could offer for food. For things like salt, we took grave risks with cross-border trade. In spite of all our best efforts, we were always hungry. We lived in shacks that offered little by way of protection from anything. We buried our dead quickly without ceremony. But despite the misery that was visited upon us, we were never sorry for ourselves. We held our heads high, we worked together, and we mostly survived. So that's what Ofia Became Home is trying to share with the posterity of Igbere and with the world. Not just that we were victims of war, but that we refused to behave like victims, We chose to confront the situation as we saw it. We held together and faced down that situation. Because of that, most of us came out of that war intact and were able to resume our lives as quickly as every other part of Igbo land. But my closing remarks on the big topic of today is to remind us that when the knee was on George Floyd's neck, no black person asked what his tribe was. No black person asked what his religion was. We were all outraged. We all felt that knee on our necks. Why is it that when we come home, we start fighting, when we are able to identify with all the George Floyds of this world? Why is it that when injustice is visited to a black person somewhere in the world, we are all black people, period? But when we come home, we start fighting over things we should be working together to improve. That sentiment that made us identify with George Floyd is available to us wherever we are as black people. If we tap into that continuously, we will find that there's much for us to work together on than to squabble about. But I'm not being naive. I know that squabbling is in the human nature. Wars have existed since the beginning of times, and wars will exist tomorrow. But we need to encourage ourselves not to only focus on what will bring wars, but also to occasionally turn attention to what can avoid wars. For in the end, the only way we can enjoy being here is by being here in peace with each other. Thank you.